The intersection of climate policy and international relations, cooperation or conflict. The 21st century is witnessing an unprecedented confluence of two of the most critical issues facing the global community: climate change and international relations. As the Earth grapples with the escalating effects of climate change, nations are increasingly aware that addressing this global crisis requires not only domestic policies, but also effective international cooperation. The political, economic, and security dimensions of climate change make it a matter that transcends borders, demanding collaboration among nations to achieve meaningful progress. However, the intersection of climate policy and international relations is fraught with challenges. While climate change is a shared threat, countries' responses to it often diverge due to economic interests, political ideologies, and concerns over sovereignty. Climate policies that aim to reduce emissions, adapt to climate impacts, and transition to renewable energy are not only environmental strategies, but also deeply intertwined with global power dynamics, trade relations, and national security. As a result, the question arises: can climate policy foster international cooperation, or will it lead to greater conflict? In this video, we will explore the complex relationship between climate policy and international relations, examining both the opportunities for cooperation and the sources of conflict. We will also consider how climate change is reshaping the global geopolitical landscape and what the future of international relations might look like in a world that must confront the existential threat of climate change. The shared threat: climate change as a global issue. Climate change is a global phenomenon with wide-reaching consequences. Rising global temperatures, more frequent and intense natural disasters, sea level rise, and changing weather patterns affect every country on Earth. The impacts are particularly severe for vulnerable populations in developing nations, but even wealthier countries are not immune to climate-related risks. From the devastating wildfires in Australia and California to the catastrophic flooding in Bangladesh and Pakistan, climate change has already begun to disrupt societies and economies around the world. Because the impacts of climate change are not confined to national borders, addressing the crisis requires a collective effort. This shared understanding of the threat could foster international cooperation as countries realize that their fates are inextricably linked. Climate change mitigation, adaptation, and resilience-building efforts must involve global collaboration, as no single nation can solve the problem on its own. Multilateral institutions, such as the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, UNFCCC, and the Paris Agreement, serve as platforms for international climate negotiations, where nations come together to set targets, share knowledge, and pledge resources. Climate policy and global cooperation: a path to unity. The global response to climate change has seen significant strides in multilateral cooperation. The Paris Agreement, signed in 2015, is the most notable example of international collaboration in the fight against climate change. Nearly every country on the planet is a signatory to the agreement, committing to limit global warming to well below 2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels, with efforts to limit the increase to 1.5 degrees Celsius. The Paris Agreement marks a historic step toward aligning national policies with global climate goals. It recognizes the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities, acknowledging that while all countries must contribute to climate action, developed nations have a greater responsibility due to their historical contribution to greenhouse gas emissions. This framework has allowed nations to tailor their climate commitments to their unique circumstances and capacities, while still contributing to global emissions reduction efforts. Beyond the Paris Agreement, international cooperation on climate change is also evident in the growing number of collaborative initiatives between countries and regions. For instance, the European Union, EU, has been a leader in climate policy, pushing for ambitious emissions reductions and renewable energy transitions. The EU's Green Deal, which seeks to make Europe the first climate-neutral continent by 2050, is one example of how regional cooperation can drive climate action. At the same time, the United States, under President Joe Biden, has rejoined the Paris Agreement and is working with other nations to set more aggressive targets for emissions reductions. Additionally, financial mechanisms such as the Green Climate Fund, GCF, play an important role in facilitating cooperation, providing financial assistance to developing countries to support climate adaptation and mitigation projects. The global acknowledgement that climate change disproportionately affects poorer nations has prompted wealthier countries to pledge financial support with the goal of ensuring equitable climate action and helping vulnerable countries build resilience. Conflict points in climate policy. Diverging national interests. While the shared threat of climate change offers a foundation for cooperation, the reality is that countries often approach climate policy through the lens of their national interests, which may not always align with global goals. Disparities in economic development, energy access, and industrialization can create tensions in international climate negotiations. One of the primary sources of conflict in climate policy is the issue of responsibility. Developed nations, which have historically emitted the most greenhouse gases, are often expected to take the lead in mitigating climate change. However, many developing nations, particularly those in Asia and Africa, are still in the process of industrializing and are heavily reliant on fossil fuels for their economic growth. Countries like China and India have argued that demanding they reduce emissions at the same pace as developed countries is unfair, given their lower historical emissions and the need for economic development. This tension has been a major point of contention in international negotiations. The principle of common but differentiated responsibilities attempts to address this by acknowledging that developing countries should be given more time to transition to cleaner energy, while developed nations should provide financial and technological support. However, the implementation of this principle is complicated, and disagreements over financial contributions and the pace of emissions reductions continue to spark conflict. Geopolitical implications. Climate change as a security issue. The intersection of climate policy and international relations is not only a matter of economic and environmental cooperation, but also a security issue. Climate change is increasingly recognized as a threat multiplier that exacerbates existing geopolitical tensions and can lead to conflict. Rising temperatures, changing precipitation patterns, and extreme weather events are already contributing to resource scarcity, migration, and instability in certain regions. For example, in parts of the Middle East and sub-Saharan Africa, droughts and water shortages have fueled political unrest and conflict. Climate change is also linked to the displacement of populations, creating climate refugees who may face hostility in neighboring countries, further destabilizing regions. What do you think of our video? Let me know in the comment section below. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to hit that like button. Also subscribe to our channel before you go. Thank you for watching.